And this is Craig Zelzer back with the Social Change Career Podcast Livestream. This is season 12, episode 19, the last season of this episode. We almost made it to 20. And today we're going to be talking about transforming lives through art and social impact with María Antonia Pérez, who's a good friend. For people who may not have joined the live stream of the podcast previously, this generally goes about an hour. And we stream to LinkedIn and YouTube. We really enjoy hearing from people watching, so feel free to let us know where you're watching from, a couple of sentences or bullet points about your background, and of course, questions and comments throughout the episode. The way you could help us, apart from just engaging now or listening in the future, is please follow call María Antonia on LinkedIn, check out her amazing work. Please follow PCDN. Please consider rating and sharing the podcast. That's the number one request. There's about 150 episodes featuring brilliant innovators from all over the world, from innovative finance to humanitarian relief to social impact to art for change. So you can search through all the podcast episodes on PCDN Global or any major podcasting platform, and so just take 30 seconds to rate it and or share it. And also, Maria was a Rotary Peace Fellow, and Rotary, I've taught in the program, and Rotary also does advertise sometimes on PCDN. So deadlines have passed for this year, but if you're looking for a chance to upskill for impact, it's one of the world's best fellowships. And they offer full funding for master's degree at one of their 6 partner universities, or full funding for a professional certificate, which is usually hybrid online and about 2.5 months in person. So applications generally open around February 2025, but check it out. It's amazing. So Maria is a committed and passionate Colombian human being with over 20 years experience in social impact and transformation. She has developed impactful processes in creative thinking, educational fields, leveraging strategic thinking and creative thinking, education for peace, and social transformation. She has worked across many sectors and does a lot of work with international INGOs and educational organizations. She's contributed to art, peace culture, peace building, and social transformation projects in Colombia, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and Japan, and elsewhere. She served and has served as an advisor to the international NGO Peace Boat, promoting peace education programs, sustainable tourism, and the UN SDGs. She has a master's degree in management of social innovation and local development from EAFIT, which is a leading university here in Medellin, and also as a Rotary Peace Fellow, where she spent time at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. And she is a positive peace activator. It's a mouthful, positive peace activator, and an Asia Pacific leadership alumni. And she's made significant strides in fostering peace and cultural citizenship. She also has worked in the public sector, leading public participatory art programs for the city of Bogota, and also working on culture and art in Medellin. So in full transparency, Toto, María Antonia, and I are friends, and we were introduced by another really good friend, Nikki Yachevich, who was on this podcast many years ago. So please check that out. And I'm based in Medellin. Toto's based in Medellin, and we're doing it not in the same space just because podcast logistics works much better. And thank you so much for joining us, María Antonia. And if you can talk a little bit about when you were a teenager. We generally try to start with this kind of question. Did you envision or think about potential career paths, whether it was dancer, artist, astronaut, medical doctor, or how in the world did you put together this really interesting aspect of art for social change?
Well, thank you, Greg. Good morning from Medellin. Thank you for this invitation. It's always nice to have this conversation with you and be part of this amazing community. And just to start with the first question. So yeah, I grew up in Medellin. My parents were architects and also really passionate about traveling and learning. So I grew up surrounded by art and design. And I knew from I was little that I was going to be doing something with art. Maybe not as an architect because it was too structured for me. But since I was little, I was painting, I was drawing, I was always taking lessons of art and creativity. And my parents really encouraged that. And I think I'm coming from a country like Colombia, where creativity, music, and art is everywhere. It was also an inspiration, but also being in a surrounding where conflict was all around. So it's kind of seeing those things around my life, growing up in a country with conflict. I also saw creativity and art everywhere when I grew up.
And when you think about art, I mean, and I am a horrible drawer. I can barely draw stick figures, but I have done a lot of work in art and more theater and kind of art for social impact. How do you define? How did you build your artistic skills? Do you think they were innate because you came from a creative family? You had great teachers, and how would you define the range of your most favorite artistic skills?
I guess I feel that we're all artists in different ways. I mean, you don't have to be a great drawer or a great like artist to consider yourself with some skills. So I think it's like, for me, art is a way of expressing. So it can be done through music, through colors, through sounds, through emotions. So for me, like growing up, like with these settings, it was more like, yeah, my parents were kind of like teaching me that. I was learning about it, but it was also kind of like a matter of curiosity, which I think is pretty much connected with art. The things you see, the things you want to like explore, and also the way you see the world. So it's kind of like the way you see colors, the way you see shapes, the way you interact with people, with languages, with sound, is the way your whole body also connects with the universe. So I think it's a self-expression that I grew up with it. Definitely, I grew up with it. But I've been taking different courses, and my career path has also taken me to learn new skills, to elaborate and to develop much more, like more creative and artistic skills into that.
And for people who don't know Medellin, I mean, people might know if they are engaged with PCN. My wife is Colombian. We met during our PhDs in conflict resolution. She's from Bogota, but I've been coming to Colombia for 20 years and living here for almost 7. So can you talk a little bit about Medellin was famous for a lot of horrible things, and there still is a subset. One of the things we can talk about, since you've done a lot of work in culture and tourism, is later we'll talk about how tourism has radically taken off in Colombia and also in Medellin. And a lot of people come for the culture and the food and dancing and language and the nature, but also a certain percentage of people are coming for the bad things. And so just growing up in Medellin, what was it like to grow up here? What role did art play in your life? How did you decide what to study and where to study?
Great. Yeah. For those who had never been, I would definitely recommend you to come and check it out, because it's very different what people can describe about it. So Medellin is a city in the mountains, and it's called the city of eternal spring. So it's a city that doesn't have seasons. So the weather is great. So the colors happen. And also culturally, I think Colombian, especially Medellin, is full of art expressions. So we have many different artists, musicians, and artists everywhere in the streets. I mean, the city is full of colors in many different ways, and it's also part of the Colombian kind of culture. Colors, music, art expressions. And I think growing up, Medellin also was or had like a very hard time. I think Colombia, I mean, we went through 50 years of conflict. So the whole country was very, very impacted and very devastated. Colombia is also a place where rural communities or rural spaces are big. So I grew up in that balance of living in the city, but also being close to the mountains and surrounded by nature. And nature has been a great inspiration in my life and professional career path as well. So it's interesting also to see how we mix those things in terms of like textures, emotions, color, shapes, absolutely everything. And I think Colombians through the conflict also developed different ways of expression. And I think Medellin has been really well known for that. So it was a very hard time. I don't say we're over it, because we're still facing many challenges as a city and as a country. But I think that art played a very important role. Musicians and artists came together to express, to communicate, to talk about differences, but also to bring people together. So I think Medellin is also really well known about their social transformation and the immense impact that has had art in their social transformation.
And can you ground that some in terms of, for people who may not have been to Medellin? So what does that mean in terms of some examples of how art has either transformed neighborhoods or built new understanding or contributed to resistance to violence? So what are some of your favorite examples?
So let me talk about a few examples. So for example, Medellin, after many years of conflict, now we have like a museum of memory. In this museum of memory, we do talk about the conflict with the different perspectives. So it's not just the victims, it's all the perspectives and all this, or everyone that was involved in the conflict, but it's done in such an amazing, symbolic, metaphoric, artistic way that it really brings art into the narrative of the conflict. So in this museum, in the Memorial Peace Museum, basically they show the different testimonies and the story of the conflict using art. And when I talk about using art, it's using audio, using graphics, using photographs, textiles, using paintings, using gardens. So all these different expressions have been really useful for also narrate or just share the past and also envision the future. And at the same time, there are different towns or different neighborhoods in the city that they use murals. They're very famous, the Comuna 13 and different areas in the city with youth have been using music and murals to tell the story of what had happened. So that talks about the past, but also brings hope in the future. So color, music, and art is everywhere in the streets. And I think it's also memory of the city.
And for people who are interested in, let's say, narratives and culture, so obviously history is always contested, and the, let's say, dominant powers or whoever is perceived as more victorious gets to influence it more. But how does, in your experience, whether you're working on art-based projects in Colombia or elsewhere, or public art in Medellin, how does it deal with that contested history? Because obviously, I mean, I think most residents of Medellin don't want to return to the violence and don't want tourism to be about all these bad things. And there's lots of beautiful things here, but how do you deal with that contested history where it's not just saying here's a narrative, but there's so many different perspectives?
And I think that's what also the museum does. It shows different perspectives. But it also, as a tourist, you need to understand all the different options that you get. And of course, not all the perspectives or the narratives are one point. I mean, I think it's also good to hear different points. I mean, we also need to understand where we're coming from. But I think what art has done here in the city, and especially it's been like Colombia has been, and especially Medellin, the social movement led by youth and by women has been very powerful. So I think civil society has had a very important voice in all the process and also keeping up the memory. So I think for Colombians, for youth, hearing the voices of those affected by the conflict, it's really important. So that's what we also need to promote outside. When you come here, the museum, for example, has the different voices, talk to communities, understand what's happening, and understanding that the conflict happened also for a reason. So it's been like many years. 50 years is pretty hard to express in a short time. But I think talking to people, understanding different perspectives will give you also your own perspective.
Okay, great. So going back to your career, so thinking about what did you study as an undergrad? Did you work as a visual artist, a graphic designer? Like how did you start your, let's say, whether it was volunteer or paid or fellowshipped, so how did you build your skills even stronger and then navigate that to making a living, or at least starting to make a living?
That's a great question because everyone asks me the same thing. It's like, how come a graphic designer end up doing peace building, which is a very interesting journey, But I think for me, creativity and design was always my career, and I always knew that I was going to be a designer using visual communication, and I worked for many years in Medellin. But my parents also kind of like gave us this social sensitivity. So since I was a child, I was volunteering national parks with different organizations. Even the schools in Colombia, you also have to do some kind of social work. And I think that social work also exposed me to different realities. So it was very interesting to see what was happening, also understanding the conflict and living in between the conflict. So I grew up as a teenager with the conflict around me, being careful about things, being careful about where to travel, what to do, what to say, but also open up my opportunities or my curiosity to see the world. So that's when I discovered that traveling and volunteering somewhere else was really interesting. So I studied graphic design here. Then I went to Spain and I did editorial design and editing. So I do design books and I illustrate books. I'm a children's book illustrator. So it was very interesting because when I was doing that work and then I had like a traineeship, like I had internship in Sri Lanka. And I think part of my trip to Sri Lanka kind of shaped my world because I also saw how after the tsunami, that was in 2004, it's a long story, but that kind of shaped my future because I saw how art and design can also benefit communities. So I started doing art and design after a country that was devastated by a tsunami. And from there, like I started doing volunteer work and working with different NGOs.
And then can you talk a little bit. So obviously the tsunami in Aceh in 2004, which also impacted lots of other territories, not just, I mean, Aceh was one of the worst affected. So what type of project, like were you doing art-based therapy, like with kids? Were you trying to do community? But was it to help people, find some solace, to help kids be entertained and learn? Was it longer term projects to deal potentially with trauma? And how in the world did you just show up? Someone invited you, you had friends? And also, how in the world did a Colombian, not that you shouldn't do, but how in the world did a Colombian wind up in Southeast Asia? Because
Sri Lanka.
I mean, yeah. So how did you do that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting because I was studying in Spain. I was doing a program, like I was studying in Barcelona, and I was part of this community called ISEC, which was like a youth organization. And as a youth, like as a leader, I was kind of really involved in different activities. So they say, hey, you can do an internship in this country. So you can either go to Cameroon to teach English, or there's an opportunity in Sri Lanka to work for a travel magazine. And I thought, well, where is Sri Lanka? Let me check in the map. I check in the map. I thought it was in India, that I've never been, like a country close to India in Asia that I've never been. It was really interesting to see that was an island. So I started researching and I got really interested in Sri Lanka. So I was appointed for like a year internship there. So I was in Sri Lanka the year before the tsunami, and I was basically very involved in design and a travel magazine. So I was mainly designing this magazine, but also gave me the opportunity to travel around the country. And then I fell in love with the country. And then I started working for an academy of design. So they hired me as a teacher, teaching design, Academy of Design in Sri Lanka. And I was teaching design. And when the tsunami happened, I was spending Christmas here in Colombia. But then I decided to go back. And that was the big question, is what can I do as a designer to contribute to a country that I care for? And that question, Greg, was what opened like the Pandora box. I was like, okay, what can I do with my creativity, my passion, and my skills to help here? So I had friends, according to your questions, yes, I had friends in Sri Lanka who were also willing to help. So we started going to the affected communities, connecting with different NGOs. And I started a project called Lasanai Art. So I was working with the kids with art, and I was staying in the camps with the kids, and my other friends were helping the families. So we created like a group together, and then I wrote like a children's books and different things. But it was more with local communities and with local like Sri Lankans that we started helping. And that opened a world of possibilities, because then I got connected to different NGOs, and different NGOs invited me to do murals, to paint with them, to work with the kids. And then I understood the power of design and art for transformation. For me, that was an eye opener. And then I got connected to Peacebuilding as well there.
Great. So you're working more in tsunami affected places in Sri Lanka, not as much in Aceh and Indonesia. Okay.
It was Sri Lanka, yeah. It was.
Okay,
I was based in Sri
yeah,
Lanka.
I mentioned that. Okay. So just want to welcome Frances from DC. She works in peace advocacy and for the DC Peace Team. And she's always flip-flop between art. She's actually a drummer. She's part of a really cool drumming group, Frances, if you want to mention. And Medellin's one of her top future travel destinations, and she's also from Ecuador. So Frances, great to see you here. Please feel free to add questions, put in a link to your drumming group, and also others. Please let us know where you're watching from, your questions, your comments. So can you talk a little bit about that space? Because it sounds like you were working in design, let's say editorial and graphic design, and even a little bit like what the magazine was focused on in Sri Lanka in terms of tourism. And then you started, in response to this horrific tragedy, just did things because a lot of times there's no strategic plan. It's like you just do things because it's the right thing to do. And you've got some skills, and not to save people, but just like to do something to help. And then how in the world mentally did you adjust? Or like when you said it opened the Pandora's box, like what was that like mentally? Like you'd already radically expanded your world, spending time in South Asia, but like what happened to you professionally when you realized there was all this other stuff? And how did you decide, did you start, and you connected NGOs. So how did you start turning that into more of a career? Was it you upskilled more? You started working with NGOs, you got some grant funding. Like how did you, because that's like this magical moment when you see so much possibility, maybe off the path of what you were originally thinking. So just and how does that relate to other people? Like how do you encourage people to like go beyond the path or paths they might be envisioning to realize often there's other ways. And I'll just say there's a couple other people. Soumya from India actually was a student of mine at UP like 20 years ago. So Soumya, feel free to share. She does a lot. She's doing a PhD and also does a lot of work on peace education and yoga. So feel free to bring in your questions and comments. But that kind of that mental transition, like, was it scary, terrifying, incredible? And how did you like actually start to operationalize it, or it just was serendipity?
Thank you. And hi, everyone that is connected from different parts of the world. Amazing to see people from everywhere. And yeah, it was really interesting, Greg, because I think like when you're in a place that you care with people that you care, that's the call to action. So I was back in Sri Lanka and say, I need to do something because it's a place that I care for. There's people affected. What am I going to do? I was a designer teaching at that point, I was teaching during the week, but my weekends were free. So with my friend from Sri Lanka, we decided to go to the affected areas and start seeing the needs. It's like, okay, what is needed? What can we do? And the communities themselves were the ones telling us we need to kind of start rebuilding and cleaning things. We need someone that help us with the kids. So I started doing a project for the kids. So I started doing like art with the kids while their parents were doing other things. So I gained their trust and I started like a camp during this weekend. So I was staying with the kids. We were doing art. And then I also understood how art was bringing us together. I mean, they spoke different languages, but they were teaching me Sinhalese. And then we start doing different things. And I also discovered their fears for the ocean and their families' struggles. So it was very interesting because I think really art helped me connect with the communities and also see the needs and the opportunities. So because I was doing that work, then different NGOs kind of see my work with the kids. So they say, hey, Maria, come here and paint a mural, or come here and do a mural here, or paint these things here. And it was very interesting because I never thought that I could work with my design skills in an NGO, for example. And it was great because then I start connecting with different projects and helping and volunteer different things. So I basically learned on the field right there. So it was more like learning from people doing humanitarian aid, learning about humanitarian aid, and then open up more questions. And I think the Pandora box opens when you see the potentials that you have and the things that you can do with your skills, but also with the desires of making a change. So that connected me with different NGOs, and people say, hey, with your skills, maybe you can apply to this, or maybe you can go here. And then I met someone in Sri Lanka in one of the camps that say, hey, you're perfect for Peace Boat. Why don't you think about doing this work in this NGO that you can basically give a lot of your skills there? And for me, it was that, like, connections. I think Sri Lanka and that place gave me connections between my skills, my desire to help, but also the connections with people and international communities.
So, and somebody I was watching on YouTube, our professor is a mural and peace artist. So really excited to hear. So Soumya, feel free to post information about the work you're doing, and also Suresh, any stuff that you're doing or questions or things specific to South Asia or India. So a question here, like we've talked to some of the top more from design thinking people in the world. And there's a colleague that I've known for many years who used to work at IDEO. I won't go into too much detail, but like, for a leading design place. And they started their own design studio called Greater Good Studio. And, and he's written a very famous piece, like saying that he was tired of trying to figure out how to sell more bad products to people, like using the power of design. And this is not so much graphic design, but kind of, design principles. Like a lot of design is about marketing and trying to get people to buy things. I mean, I'm talking about one aspect. And, he decided that's not how he wanted to spend his life. And he and his wife founded a, social impact design studio. So they focused on design thinking principles, innovation, but all focused on communities and impact and not to sell more things. So when you think, and there is a great movement called Creatives for Climate, if people haven't looked at, but this incredible global movement of creatives, all different skill sets, who are like, let's not try to market to buy things. Let's be creative about how we raise awareness around climate change. So for when you started to move towards design for impact, did you find a broader design community, or does that exist today? Like when you think about designers, and that means so many different things, but like, where do you go? Was there a community of like, because there's like Doctors Without Borders and all these things. Is there Designers Without Borders, or like, where did you go to find others? And then does that community exist now, or where do you go to connect with other designers who are doing similar efforts or just to learn from?
Yeah, I think at that point, after Sri Lanka, I wasn't really aware of that community. And I think that community has been growing for the last few years. I mean, people are understanding the impact of design. And I think I think we're changing also this paradigm about design and marketing. I think nowadays we understand that design, everything that shapes the world. So nowadays, I think we are all more aware about how we design buildings, how we design roads, how we design clothes. I think we are in a moment of history where design is not necessarily what we consume, but how we produce it. So I think right now there's more movements. At that point, I was very connected with Designer for Change or different organizations, but at that time I was more experiencing myself. So I wasn't sure if there was a community of designers thinking the same way, but I was discovering myself as a creative, and I've been connecting much more design and peace building. So it's also in different ways of peace building and social transformation. But design, I mean, as a graphic designer, design has been a great communication tool for me, because as a graphic designer, I use graphic design, illustrations, art, and different visual approaches to communicate different causes. So I've been using it and exploring it, and there's many different communities, but more than communities, I've also have seen the need of creativity and art in different organizations. So more than a global community, I have found like different spaces and people that I connect with and that can also appreciate the things that I do.
Okay, so Soumya just making a comment about kind of equity in design, and that there still tends to be a fair amount of gender discrimination. And so I was just curious, any thoughts about, is design, are women equally represented women and trans and LGBT equally represented in all sectors, or they tend to be, not so much in the influential sectors, or is design mostly come from the global north, and that, and people in the majority of the world are expected to copy that? And I mean, obviously those are big questions, but any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you're right saying that there's a lot of still discrimination. There's a lot of discrimination in design, but I have to say that I've been lucky, but also very selective where I work. I mean, I also choose places where discrimination is not there. I work surrounded by amazing women in Sri Lanka, Colombia, Cambodia, Japan, Bolivia, US. Like, you also choose the places where you're not discriminated. So I think we're fighting also for others, but I think you also need to choose the settings where you're valued and when you're also part of it. So I think, to be honest, I know it is there. I hope I can do more for like avoiding it. But I've been lucky in my life and my career to be surrounded by amazing women and spaces that are very open and very equal in that sense.
Okay. Thank you so much, Soumya. Keep the questions coming and let us know whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, where you're watching from. So a question is, how much time did you spend in South Asia? You spent, between Sri Lanka and Cambodia, I think quite a number of years. And was it fellowships? Was it volunteered? How did you pay the bills? And at what point did you decide to move back to Colombia for some period of time, and kind of how you navigated that professionally, and, as you decided to do a master's?
Yeah, I think after Sri Lanka, as I said, like somebody told me about this organization called Peace Boat. So I went from Sri Lanka to Japan, and I traveled around the world for a few years, actually working for Peace Boat, like a boat that travels around the world. So it was not just Asia, but it was everywhere in the world. Then I worked for a while in Cambodia for a local organization, sometimes where volunteers work, but at that point I was already a professional, so they pay me for do these projects. So I was doing book design, I was doing graphic design, I was doing consultancy with different organizations. So I worked with Peace Boat that was based in Japan for more than 11 years. And basically, because I was on Peace Boat and I was learning about peace education, I decided to come back to Colombia in 2016. And I wanted to do my master's in Colombia because it was about local development and social innovation. So that's when I came back to Colombia, and I did my master's here because I really wanted to get more in the local context in the country. So I did my master's here, and then I basically applied for a scholarship with Rotary that you mentioned before. I did the diploma in Chulalongkorn in Thailand, that it was a professional diploma, like a 3-month program. And then I've been like learning about peace building, conflict resolution, mediation, also like short programs. And I've been part of different fellowships as peace activator and also a leadership program in Southeast Asia. So I've been pretty much connected with Asia for many years. So my connection is between Latin America and Asia. So I think my heart is pretty divided. Like I feel I'm part of both continents.
Yes, and they're definitely very different time zones in terms of. So a couple of questions, and again, please keep letting us know. And also, you were a fellow at the East West Center, so it's another great place in Honolulu, and you also work there. So for people who have a Asia or Asia Pacific connection, and sometimes U.S., but not exclusively, it's a great opportunity. And again, the Rotary Peace Fellowship applications are closed, but next year they'll open up. Actually, let me go back to Peace Boat a little bit. So. I will say years ago there used to be. There's semester at sea, so I knew some people who worked there, and then there was like a startup called the Scholarship, which was out of Baltimore. And I actually applied, and they started interviewing me because I was thinking it'd be great to travel and teach. There's a lot of environmental costs to cruise ships. That's one thing, but then it wouldn't have worked logistically, so I backed out. But what in the world is Peace Boat? Where did it come from? And then for people who might be curious, to either be engaged or learn more, or how do you go on a trip? Is it only mostly from people from, East Asia or Japan? And, what's the mission? How do they accomplish it? And where, it's kind of a crazy but cool idea. Like it's not, I have a friend, couple in their 80s, and they go on a cruise, like they go on the same cruise almost every other year. So the Peace Boat is not about that. So
it's really interesting because when I met this lady in Sri Lanka, she said, "Hey, Maria, you're perfect for Peace Boat." And I was like, "Okay, what is Peace Boat?" She said, "Well, it's an international organization with more than 40 years. And it's different peace building programs, but there's a cruise ship with 1,000 passengers that travels around the world for 3 months doing peace education." And I was like, "Oh my God, I want to volunteer for that." So at the beginning, I apply as a volunteer and I travel around the world teaching English and Spanish, mainly Spanish. So I was teaching Spanish on board. Participants on board, they pay to be on board. There are different ways to pay. So they can pay with volunteer hours, they can just start saving, but they pay to be on board. So right now we have around 1,500 every time. So participants are generally, at the beginning, there were more from Japan. Now we have from Southeast Asia participants. So people can pay to be on board, but it's like a global community. We call it the Global University. So it's a cruise ship that travels around the world for 3 months. And during that time on board, we have different guest speakers that give like presentations, that talk about culture. And what Peace Boat promotes is one-to-one education and collaboration. So you can understand better conflict when you meet someone from the country. You can understand better humanity and build peace if you're able to have direct dialogues. So on Peace Boat, like we don't have a casino or like a big pool. We have really cool things, but it's more educational voyage, and we promote experiential learning. So Peace Boat does one cruise ship every 3 months. So there are 4 cruise ships a year. Every time the passengers or the participants change, and we have different campaigns like going on in Japan, and we have an office in New York. And right now we're focusing a lot about sustainability. So we partner also with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And right now, Peace Boat is also building a more eco ship, because we know how much the cruise industry contaminates, but we're also creating conscience about that. So it's a very safe and innovative way to do peace education on board, traveling around the world. So yeah, I'm still working for them as a consultant in different projects.
And do you know, because obviously in the shipping industry, whether it's cruises or, transporting goods, shipping contributes a lot to climate change and carbon impact, but there are now electric boats and all sorts of biofuel. Some of that's good, some of it's bad, but I haven't heard of a cruise ship that has like electric boats tend to be smaller. So I'm just curious, like, do you know much about what's being built or how it's going to reduce the climate impact or when it might be ready?
Now, right now, there's a bit more conscious about it. And I think especially after COVID, I think the cruise industry has changed a lot. But I think Peace Boat is really aware of that. We don't own the boat, we rent it, but we try to have also cultural practices inside the boat. So let's understand what is sustainable tourism. What can we do even with the passengers when we arrive to a place? What do we do with the garbage? How do we behave as tourists in different countries? how we recycle water, how we save energy. And Peaceville is planning to build an eco ship with solar, with solar energy by maybe 2030. So
Okay.
it's a undergoing project. So we want to be the flagship of the industry. There are really few, not like very big ones so far, but I think that's where the industry is going.
Okay, stay tuned. 2030 is not that far away. So switching, you worked in Bogota, I forgot the name, basically for the mayor's office, helping to manage and run public participatory art for this huge city. I mean, it's a wonderful city. It's also very chaotic. So what in the world does that mean to be working on for you weren't working in museums, like I mean you were doing things, but you weren't like just trying to equip museums. You were trying to help, because Bogota has an incredible art life. So how in the world did you get the job? What did you do there? And particularly when people think about, some people would just say art is fluffy and it's esoteric and it's elite. I mean, that's not the case. Like, how did you ground it? And when you tried to talk about impact, whether it was to the mayor or particular people or outsiders, like how would you demonstrate impact? Like whether it was time or human time or money or resources invested, how would you try to show some type of, like, how would you measure either transformation, impact, or change? And what are your suggestions for others? That's one of the challenges of, I mean, I so deeply, I did my dissertation on arts and peace building in Bosnia, and I so deeply believe that the world needs more art, and not just in museums are wonderful, but like art is such an essential part of being, whether it's dance or film or visual or whatever, and that in too many places, because some certain percentage of people sit in an office all day, it's like it's been disconnected and it's become removed. Not for everybody. And that the more we create space for togetherness and creating, the better off we'll be. But so like a little bit about your job in Bogota, and then how in the world do you measure impact, and your advice for others? And Suresh is commenting, he does similar work with children communities. So just your advice for policy and art jobs, impact measurement, and what did you love about the job? And not to critique the city of Bogota, but like, since you've worked both in public and nonprofit and INGOs, like, what are some of the great things about working in the public sector and some challenging things? I know that was a lot of questions, but
Yeah, it's okay. I took notes. So basically, the way I end up there, so after I finished my scholarship in Thailand, and after doing this program for 3 months, I decided I wanted to come back to Colombia and give back also. So when I came back, one of my friends was working there. When she knew I was back and that I was working on peace, there was this position for a coordinator for arts for social transformation in the Institute of Arts, IDARTES in Bogota, which is part of the mayor's office. So it was a perfect time for me because I really wanted the chance. I mean, it was the first time living in Bogota, the capital of Colombia, like a big city, but then it's also understanding the impact of the work. I think when you work for the public sector, you understand that it has many challenges. It's hard, but the impact is huge. And what happened there in the arts, I mean, this strategic line was working for a few years already, but it was very important because it was just after the peace agreement in Colombia. So there was a lot of things to do. But at the same time, I think art for social transformation was a tool to give voices, to get to different territories, to give participation, to give opportunities to minorities, to hear different expressions. We had really important projects also going to the rural areas in Bogota, because people think that Bogota, because it's a big city, is also like 70% rural. And sometimes those communities don't have the access to opportunities or voices or representations or even to express their cultures. So it was very interesting because art really gave us the chance, art for social transformation gave us the chance or the opportunity to connect the dots, to connect communities, to give them a voice, to give them a space, and to give them opportunities. So I had like a team of 12 people, and we were doing, we had different, like a budget to basically open opportunities, to open festivals. We also did like social transformation forum where we have the voices from those communities, also international voices participation. So it was a space of dialogue. It was very interesting. And in terms of measure the impact, it was a challenge, I have to say. but also the way you show how the money is investing in communities, how many people participate, how many new communities are represented, how many new events are created, how many new members are participating. So sometimes in art, I think that's one of the challenges, how we put names into the impacts that we do with art. But also art can be an expression. So we had different exhibitions. So the exhibitions and the participations was also a way to measure. And we also had like a follow-up with the communities that had benefits from those resources. So it was very interesting. And when you ask me about the change from nonprofit to basically working for the government, I wish everyone had the chance to work for the government. I mean, it's super challenging, but I think I was very, very strong judging the government from the NGO perspective. And I think being inside also gives you perspective, the impact that they have, the way they work. So it gave me a different way of thinking and understanding the system from inside. So I think working in private, public, and public sector is crucial because it's very easy to judge the government and say you should do, you should do, you should do. But when you are inside, you understand the limitations, but also the opportunities. So to really work with the system, I think you have to understand it. So for me, it was a very interesting learning experience with frustrations, of course, but I think there are more the opportunities to scale, to grow, and to sustain in time. Because you have a budget and you can work with that. With NGOs, you need to find a budget. So there are different ways to approach their resources and also how you measure impact.
So if people, I'm sure this happens to a lot, people come and say, one, you're a very interesting person just to speak with, but also they say, how in the world have you built this incredible, impactful, ethical career where you get to work with interesting people in Colombia and partners all over the world and pay your bills? So, what is your advice for people, whether they are deeply engaged in artistic processes or just want to be change makers? What skills, apart from your, let's say, artistic skills, would you say have been most useful, or you would encourage others? Yeah, obviously it's person, country, sector specific, but you would say, like, if you're going to try to do this little bit of unusual path, because there's no direct career path. I mean, you could have stayed, let's say, with an NGO or INGO forever, or the government or academia, but you kind of, you have I won't say you float, you base yourself in multiple areas. So for people who don't want to just be like, I don't want to just work for War Child or Oxfam or the government, what skills do you personally find most useful? And then what would you encourage others to think about developing? And also, what are some pathways to build those?
That's a great question. And I'm going to answer what I also teach my students when I teach design. It's like, what are the skills in the future? What should we just embrace and develop? And this is not something that I created, but I've been reading a lot about this. So they're like the 4 C's. The 4 C's are the skills of the future. And the 4 C's are curiosity and creativity. That's 1 C, creativity. So I feel that creativity and curiosity kind of open up my own professional path, but also my skills. So I think you have to be curious and keep on learning and keep on asking things and seeing other ways to express it. So creativity and curiosity. The other skill, I think, is critical thinking. And when I talk about critical thinking, it's about asking the right questions. And the right questions are for yourself and for others. What do I want? What I'm good at? Where I am right now? And what is needed? So those questions are really important. So critical thinking is a crucial skill that I use in my life and my professional skill. And I also kind of teach and encourage that in students. Collaboration. Definitely collaboration is the 3rd C, collaboration. You cannot create a path by yourself. You need to be collaborating with organizations, with the government, with other countries, with other colleagues, with other professionals. Collaboration is key, is a key skill. And the 4th C, very important in our field or in my field, is communication. How you communicate about what you're doing, how you communicate about what you want, how you communicate with others, how do you find those channels? So for me, sometimes the way I find opportunities is about like communicating with friends, asking what I want. And sometimes it's also creating the opportunities that I want. Sometimes we don't find the perfect job out there. Sometimes we just have to create it. So You have to be proactive and say, hey, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I can do for you. Can we collaborate? And then you open the curiosity, do you create critical thinking, and then you start collaboration.
Amazing. So can you talk a little bit about the financial aspects? So obviously, does most of the, obviously do a lot of things volunteer, but we all need to pay bills unless we have, a trust fund or a benefactor or a wealthy relative, we have to work. So do most of the opportunities come to you like inbound, like people are like, hey, would you be interested? Or you see things and you're applying for them? And how do you deal with periods of uncertainty? We don't need to know about your finances, but how do you deal with these periods of uncertainty? And do you think sometimes about, hey, I just want to have a stable job and a stable income, for the long term? And you have had that. So, but just like, how do you balance that desire to be inherently creative, participatory, collaborate, and do fascinating projects with the need to pay the bills? And like when you've had those, let's say, more stable roles, and we won't talk about which organizations, like when have you known it, like what has been the benefit, and when have you known it's time to maybe change? And your advice for others. That's a dilemma so many of us face. Like, should I just get a job? Obviously it's a privilege to have the choice to, maybe not have to be stuck in a job just to pay the bills. Like that is inherently elite privilege. But how do you decide between that?
That's a really hard question. And I think that's a question that is always in my mind. But I have to say that it depends of the responsibilities that you have in your life. I have to say that I am single, I'm not married, I don't have kids. So my responsibilities might be very different from everyone. Everyone has done their own choices and commitments. So if you decide to have children, you need to think in the future in a different way. So right now, like, I'm single, independent, I can be everywhere. My parents are here, so they're okay. So I think my responsibilities, I'm really aware of what they are. So at the beginning of my career, I was a volunteer very often, and I still do, but I also understand that sometimes the emotional salary, it also helps me. So right now in my life, I'm looking for opportunities that give me the lifestyle I want. People ask me sometimes, oh, how do you get all these scholarships? How do you get all these opportunities? And I always say, nobody is coming to my life or my house and knocking the door and say, hey, Maria, this is here for you. If you want to get these opportunities, you have to write, you have to apply, you have to keep the information up to date, you have to be connected with networks. And that's what I always say, it's collaboration. You need to be on the move, you need to be in the right networks. Opportunities are there. We just need to find the time, the energy, and the perfect time to do. So I'm applying for different scholarships. It takes time to apply. It takes time. It takes a community. But if you do it, you'll get it. I've been getting all the things that I kind of planned because I call myself a stubborn optimist. So when I have something in my head, I'll go for it. It doesn't just come in my door and knocks a bit. So it's basically, there's some times of uncertainty, yeah, of course, but I think you also have to learn how to deal with that. And you have to be organized in terms of finance, because if you decide this is your lifestyle, you need to have some savings, you need to have some investments, or you need to understand what is your lifestyle. So my lifestyle is very easy. I can live with a suitcase for 6 months, or I can stay in a place for longer. So I think it's also understanding where you want to be, like understanding those questions. Being in one place is incredible. Having like a stable place or city is great. Is not necessarily for me for a long time, but I understand that already. So I know that I need to keep on moving. I need to keep on learning. I need to keep on like being kind of motivated with different projects. So I think once you understand what makes you happy and what's the lifestyle you want, you're going to start looking for those options. Right now, I have been working as a consultant for the last year, and it's not necessarily the most stable position, but in this moment in my life and at my professional and age, it's just giving me what I want. And what I want is freedom, and my freedom and flexibility also has a price. So what are you willing to give up for the lifestyle you want to have?
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a hard balance, and obviously it changes from time to time. Just for people who are interested in seeing more about your work and potentially, if they have an opportunity they might want to share with you, Do you have your own website, like a portfolio website, or LinkedIn's the best place? Like if people want to understand both your visual art and graphic design and book work and facilitation work, is there a website or LinkedIn's the best place to contact
Well,
you?
I have a website with my design work. My
Okay.
design work is basically based on illustration, corporate design, and so design for social transformation. So I do
Okay.
have a
Yeah,
website.
if you can put that, you can put it in, and I'll share it, put it in the chat.
Okay,
So
I will share
Soumya,
in a second.
right. And I'll just say, like, fellowships have changed my life. You know, I've reviewed for lots of fellowships. I've and helped many, many, many people get fellowships. And I think exactly what you said is like that no one has ever knocked on my door. I mean, actually, I have had people email me and say, "Do you want to apply for this?" Because they think I might be a fit, but that's pretty rare. But like, it's learning to understand that there's a process for applying, learning to create compelling narrative and materials, understanding why in the world that donor foundation person is giving this funding, because it's not about you, it's about the donor and kind of how what you could do matches their mission, and then being rigorous and getting rejected tons of times, but also being persistent and being humble but like bold. And I mean, I've told this story many times, and the reason I got a Fulbright, a mentor of mine, after I came back from Hungary, I did study abroad. She's like, apply for this. I'm like, that's for important people. And she was persistent. So I applied, you know, and I got it for 2 years, changed my life. And I've had other fellowships. And then, you know, I was professor tenure full times, and I was a fellowship advisor for a fellowship on the side for 9 years. And I remember one student, I made her cry because I was like, you know, I'm not a mean person, but I was like, I didn't say it was crap. I said, this is not good. And we'd already been through like 5 rounds, like, you know, and she started crying in my office, but she went back, she did another round, and then she got the fellowship. So it's like, it's also like the idea, sometimes I can do it in 2 hours, but the idea is like, if it's a competitive fellowship, it needs to be well constructed. So anyway, and you always have to be looking and referring others. So fellowships are amazing.
And you also know what? I think you just mentioned something, Greg, that is very important. It's like surround yourself with people that trust you and believe in you. Sometimes we don't believe in ourselves. I mean, I think we all have sometimes the imposter syndrome. But when you have people around you that believe on your capacities, I mean, Greg believe in me, and I'm here invited because he also trusts me. I have these amazing people around me that because they believe in what I do, they also show me opportunities. So also definitely surround yourself with people that believe in you.
Yep. And also challenge you. Yes.
Definitely.
So Soumya is asking, do you have any favorite community art theorists similar to Augusto Boal or Paulo Freire? Like, you know, so if you think about kind of like the role of community art or design, do you have any favorite theorists or practitioners you follow, or groups or places? So someone like, you know, because obviously Augusto Boal, legislative theater, and, you know, and all his work is amazing, and Paulo Freire. So is there anyone current or past that you would say, like, if you really want to look at interesting applications? I mean, there used to be a great group in the US called the Community Arts Network that was doing this all over, and they had funding and great website and all. I think I wrote a case study for them, but their funding ran out. So like, you know, so where do you recommend people might go to be inspired or to learn?
I mean, I have to say that right now I'm reading a lot about, like, not necessarily just artists doing peace building, but also peace building learning about artists. And that's the book I wrote about. Like, so I learn a lot from communities. I have to say that sometimes we think that we need to learn from like super famous artists, but I learn a lot from really local communities. And I'm really inspired by the work of Jean-Paul Lederach. So Jean-Paul Lederach wrote this amazing book that for me is like my Bible. It's called The Moral Imagination. And I think the moral imagination, for me, it's an incredible guideline to understand peace building and creativity. So more than, I mean, I have many artists that I kind of admire in the way they do, but more in the way they express is about the way they use art. So you mentioned before also IDEO. I also like IDEO a lot, but right now I'm really obsessed of learning more and reading more about Lederach. I mean, it's been for a while. But again, I learn a lot from communities and from children. I have to say that children are my best artists and my best professors ever.
I have to say this, I don't remember when this was. María Antonia came to our house and brought her like artistic supplies, and, you know, our son is pretty artistic. I mean, he's really into football, that's his main thing, but he likes to draw and dance. But I don't remember how much time, but you just like got him drawing, and he's so good at card making, like birthday cards. When someone's, he could actually, when he makes cards, he could have them in shops, but it's like just watching you interact with him and that kind of creative aspect. And then also Suresh is inviting you to do something in India. So Suresh, feel free to message Toto directly or message me or Soumya, and I'll connect you or connect with her.
I think Suresh, you're in India, no? Yeah, he wrote to me before. Yeah,
yes.
definitely.
Okay. This is your website. So a couple more questions. So first, can you talk about the IEP, the peace, the positive peace? I already forgot that, with the Institute of Economics and Peace and Rotary, what you're doing, and just let people know that Institute for Economics and Peace has all this free online training, and also what else, other ways people can get involved, because it's a terrific resource, but both their research, but also their training and capacity building.
Yeah, and I think especially in peace building, I think everyone knows the negative peace kind of like description, but nowadays we're working more to positive peace, and positive peace is basically what are the mechanisms, institutions, and connections that can build peace. So positive peace is not, negative peace is the absence of violence, and positive peace is a different approach. So positive peace was a concept created by Galtung many years ago, and the Institute for Economics and Peace, in partnership with Rotary International, they have created this academy and the Positive Peace Activators program, when they have created a framework of 8 different pillars, really interesting pillars. You can learn, there's a program online called the Academy of Peace, Positive Peace. So you can take like a 2-hour course. And I'm also part of this Positive Peace Activators network around the world. So far we have 7 different cohorts. I'm part of the Latin American cohort. We already kind of finished all the continents. We just finished Oceania. But basically the pillars of positive peace talks about like a more proactive and more constructive, long-lasting peace. So it's, for example, about like well-functioning governments, free flow of information, high levels of human capital, good relationships with the government, acceptance of right of the others, low levels of corruption, equitable distribution of resources, and sound business environment. So when you think about peace in that way, when you think it as a system thinking kind of connection, then you understand peace different. So there are great opportunities and resources online. I think you just posted. Thank you for posting also the Academy, because there you can take these courses and have like a different approach to peace that I use for many of my projects.
Thank you so much. I had Galtung as a professor a million years ago, and probably unfortunately he passed away recently, but definitely I had lots of founders of the field or second generation founders of the field as professors, and all had their strengths, but Galtung definitely, and I was part of the Transcend Network, but really his definition and explanation of direct cultural instruction, he had lots of concepts, because he was a mathematician by training, but the definition of cultural, structural, and direct violence, and just how often we focus on the direct violence, but so much of direct violence, whether it's physical or cultural or verbal, is underlined by systems and beliefs. So, and he also always talked about all intervention should be based on creativity, nonviolence, and empathy. They should be reversible. Some of his stuff, some stuff was too far out there, in my opinion. But if you're interested in systematic approaches to large-scale social challenges and having a pretty interesting theoretical underpinning, that's really had a big impact around the world. And then obviously Institute for Economics and Peace, Steve Killalea and his team, really the way he tells the story, is that, I don't know the whole truth, you might know it better, but he was sitting somewhere and people were talking about indices to measure the good and the bad in the world, whether it's literacy rates or, maternal mortality or health rates. And he's like, how do we measure peace? I forgot who he was talking to, he's told this story. I was at one of the launch events in DC, and he gave a talk for us at Georgetown. And, the idea is we spend all this money on war and so many things, shouldn't we? And they started with negative peace. That was one of the really big critiques. And they worked with the Economist Intelligence Unit using publicly available data. But over the past 5 to 10 years, they've also moved to positive. So it's a terrific resource. And one of the things they'll do each year, I think it's coming out soon. They do a whole bunch of research projects. One is just saying, hey, this is how countries around the world where they have enough data, it's usually about 160, how they rate on peacefulness. And it's not some abstract concept of are people happy or hugging trees. It's how much are they spending on jails and war and education and how much crime, and it's some people question the methodology, but it's really interesting. And then they'll do subs in the US, the UK, Mexico. I think they've done sub-national studies. So anyway, so it's a great resource, and they also do stuff on terrorism and business. So if you're interested in anything on policy and peace, like, it's amazing. And one of
they
the
just
things
they just launched the report for 2024 this week, so it's really updated. Like, it's on their website. Really interesting, because the question that you said, like, how do we really measure peace? I mean, it's fantastic.
And when I've given talks or presentations or just my own research, because to anchor peace, one of the things they'll come out with, again, not everyone will agree with their data, but they'll say the global GDP is about 80, 90 trillion dollars. They say the cost of global violence is, this year I think it's 17 trillion. So it's about 14% of all GDP. So, and then they'll go like on a per capita basis. So instead of like this abstract thing, it really makes it measurable. And so that's a question I have for you. When you come across people, and we'll finish in about 5 minutes, but when you come across people who are like, oh, you're just one of those peace huggers and you like to do art and, hug. Kata and I got married in Woodstock, but like not from the concert, but my parents lived in Woodstock for many years. But I'm not a hippie, but I agree with a lot of hippie things. But like, the challenge is so much of peace is written off as unrealistic, and it's a brutal world. And the idea that you can even talk or build peace is ridiculous. So how do you address both personally, when not someone attacking you, but just like someone skeptical and said, like, no, it's whoever has the most force or power wins. And then what data, when people are like, say, yeah, it's nice to talk about peace, but what data or stories do you draw on, particularly let's think more at a policy level, to try to demonstrate that it's not just idealistic, like it's really, there's concrete evidence to show that it can work, and this is the human economic infrastructure benefits or the effectiveness?
Yeah, that's a hard question, because we do get questioned all the time. But I also said, like, peace is a word that has had different meanings around the world. I think it's been misused as well. I think we really need to understand what is peace, and we need to talk about individual approach to peace, but also collective and global approach to it. So when people ask me, what are you doing for peace, or why we should have peace, I said, do you want to have a well-being? Do you want to have a good life? So we need peace. Peace is about having the conditions to have the life we want. And the conditions is about not just the absence of violence. The conditions are different things. Peace is not anymore the hippie concept. I think peace is also the conditions that we have in our lives and in our surroundings to have the life we want, and a good life and a safety space. So I think the way people sometimes talk about idealistic, and people ask me, "Are you idealistic?" And I am. Sometimes I am. And if you work in peace building, you have to be idealistic, because you need to also, you need to be realistic what was happening in the world, but you also need to be a stubborn optimist to have hope. You need to believe that what we're doing is helping. And I stopped thinking about like necessarily changing the world with that one action. There's something I've learned in my career. It's not about saving the world. It's about making changes in your surrounding. You cannot talk about the war or the peace in Gaza when you have conflict at home, or when you have war in your communities. So I think peace are very simple actions. And I always say peace is a process. You need to be very patient with peace, because it takes time, but it starts with you, with your family, with your community. So start not trying to change the world, is just transform your surrounding. And this is my perception of peace. Peace is about making better conditions and having the conditions to have a good life in your surrounding. And that's going to affect everyone's. If we all think that way, that's the way we create like a global movement to that.
And do you have any favorite data or stories or examples of, obviously I've seen tons of examples where I've been involved in or have read about, direct experience where I've seen people transform or communities transform. The question is, if someone's like, hey, Colombia is still in a pretty violent state. There's 60 years of conflict, and yes, the largest insurgent movement, 85% of their fighters demobilized, but 10 or 15% moved to pure criminality. And there's still, so you have an example, like when someone says, what are the examples at the macro level that can show that whether it's at the macro level in a single country or beyond just community, like what are your examples when someone's like, you're just like dreaming? What do you draw on?
Okay, I'll give you an example that happened this year. And it was very interesting because I was in Sri Lanka and I started this ocean think tank with my students from design. And we start learning. I mean, imagine Sri Lanka is an island and most of their territory is ocean. They need to live from the ocean. So we started the Ocean Conservation Project and I started giving lectures and presentations. And when you think about changes, we need to think about behavioral change. It's not just about how the information that we're giving can basically bring a transformational change in the terms of behavior. People behave when they also understand the reasons. I mean, it doesn't have to be forced. So what we did is about like a behavioral change with the students. So they understood the process. So I took my students for a beach cleanup. So they saw the plastic. Then we took them to a factory to see how the plastic was transformed. And the same day that we did that activity, the students, I mean, and I'm not talking about all the students, I'm talking about 3 or 4 students. When they went to the shop, they say, please don't give me any plastic bag. So I do feel that the example that I can give you, it's more personal changes because I think those students who are young that refuse to use a plastic bag after the experience are going to be the ones doing transformational projects. So I think that people change when you expose them to experiences and we just basically show them some information. So people do care. People care what they learn from. So it's like if you teach them about the ocean, they're going to protect it. So for me, that was a very simple but very moving story because it was just after a few hours of getting exposed to the ocean kind of like degradation that they by themselves, we went to a shop and they say, no, I don't need plastic. And then that's a beginning. That's a beginning of a change in behavior. And I was really happy to see that.
Very cool. And I would say at the macro level, like I haven't been in Northern Ireland in a long time, but in the 80s and 90s, Northern Ireland was quite violent, not all parts, and still totally dysfunctional. But like but now they kind of fight in this dysfunctional political system, and and there's lots of examples like that. Like the idea, like they've magically achieved peace. Colombia is more peaceful than it was. Not if you're a human rights activist in a rural area. There's still lots of displacement. But it's funny because I remember early on when I started coming to Colombia, there was this tourism campaign because people drink coffee. They might know Juan Valdez is one of the most recognized kind of branding. There's been multiple Juan Valdez's, but I remember in the early 2000s there was this campaign because tourism in Colombia was quite low, and there was this campaign, Colombia, the only risk is you want to stay. So they were playing on risk, and it was a brilliant campaign. And now Colombia has record number of foreign tourists. And again, that's creating a whole nother set of problems. It's not all good, but it's like, but people are coming to Colombia for so many of the good reasons. And so it's just interesting, like 20 years ago, when I was coming to my first trip to Colombia, and I've been all over the world, I'm like, they're going to kidnap me when I get off the plane, and it's like, I mean, and we did go through some checkpoints in more rural areas, which was scary, but it's like, and there still is a lot of danger here, but like in certain parts of the country, there's so much more security and less violence. While in the rural areas, it's still very challenging. So just to finish up with 3 questions, what are you working on upskilling now? Not that you have to be, but like, what are you I know you're always learning. So is there anything you're working to improve or that you're hoping to start learning? Or you right now, just since you are in between trips, you just want to relax, which is totally cool too.
I'm too curious to stay still. So I'm always learning something.
That should be like your book. You're curious to stay still.
Too curious to stay still. So right now, as a peace activator, I'm really helping training other peace activators in the positive pillars. So I'm working on that. I'm also learning new languages. So I'm learning Portuguese. I love languages, and I'm always learning something new. So like I'm reading a lot. I'm trying to get in different courses. I think it's, as I say, curiosity. I'm always learning new skills, definitely. Right now, really learning about new frameworks and new strategies for peace building with the pillars, and also how to incorporate like maybe design thinking and other strategies into that.
Okay. Second question, if you think back in the past 6 months, if you've had time to watch any movies or shows, whether in the theater or streaming, any show that just doesn't have to have anything to do with impact, but that just has really occupied your brain in a good way that you might just say, hey, it's worth looking at?
Today I was actually talking about that. I saw the last time I went to the cinemas, it was more than 6 months ago. And the last movie I saw, it was Oppenheimer. And that movie was really interesting for me because I have worked with survivors from the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I always had also the Japanese perspective working with this NGO. And it was very interesting to see different perspectives and to see the movie because it was a story that I would never hear before. So I think it's hearing different stories. That movie was really interesting. And that was the last time I went to the cinema. So you can imagine that was a long time ago.
Okay. And then the last question, obviously you do consulting work, and 2 questions. So you do consulting work. So whether people see things that they might want to send your way, or they might want to contact you about opportunities, like what are the general areas of things you're most passionate? I mean, because you have a lot of skills, like, but what are the things, like if someone sees an opportunity or they're interested in exploring working with you, like what are the areas you're most passionate about consulting with?
So I'm really passionate about teaching and teaching with creativity. So I use creative tools for teaching, especially teaching peace and teaching design for social transformation. That's definitely one of my passions. Now I'm really also connected with ocean conservation and climate change, super interesting. I'm also working as a freelance doing graphic design for different NGOs and different projects. So bringing communication as a tool for better understanding. I also do that. And I'm also teaching in the pillars of positive peace. So any projects with peace building, creativity, arts, or community engagement, I'm super happy to be there.
And then the last question, do you offer any public courses? If someone's like they really are intrigued about this intersection of design, impact, creativity, are you offering or planning to offer, whether it's a one-off or cohort-based course, anything that's not rooted in another existing institution? So someone just like, help me figure out as a cohort.
I mean, not yet, but I think talking to you, Greg, that was a great inspiration. I think you were a motivation for me to think that about in the future. I mean, what you're doing with this community is also putting into a community and knowledge. So I've been thinking about it since our last conversation, and I'm not doing it right now. I mean, I love teaching like one-to-one students, and I'm going back to Sri Lanka to teach in September. But in the future, why not? I mean, I'm happy to maybe build the content, and maybe I will be developing a curriculum for art and peace building. I mean, I wrote a book about it with some, I mean, I co-author a book, but I think like making that a course will be like a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chat about it, and I think there'll be a lot of interest. So thank you so much for taking time in between your travel. I won't say all the places you're going and been, and for sharing your wisdom and experience and hope, and also reflections on the wonders of change making, and also it's not all wonderful, and the realistic stuff. And thank you everyone for joining us now or listening in the future. And then just going back to the beginning, 3 quick requests. Please follow Maria Antonia on LinkedIn. Feel free to be in contact with her. I mean, don't inundate her, but if there's certain specific things, please follow PCDN. Please check out this episode of the podcast and consider rating and sharing. So this is episode 19 of season 12. Season 13 will start in the fall. Again, we have amazing guests from all over the world, and you can search on PCN Global across all the sectors, and rating and sharing is the biggest thing to help. And check out the International Institute for Economics and Peace and all of their amazing both research and training resources, and of course the Rotary Peace Fellowship. And anything else you want to mention in terms of resources that, and again, these will go into the show notes, but anything else in terms of a resource that I didn't mention now?
I think maybe the East West Center. The East West Center has really interesting resources in terms of leadership, and also connected to Asia, with women, with minorities, with ocean conservation. Really interesting resources there. And I think in general, just look for the communities and spaces that they have.
And Peace Boat. Yes.
And Peace Boat, Peace Boat as well. Like really interesting volunteer opportunities as well, and traveling around the world. And you're always, Greg, like basically sharing the most amazing resources. So I'll say just follow you and also check the resources that you're always sharing.
Okay. Thank you so much for everything you do. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And again, thank you or morning, since it's morning here. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a great day.
Thanks for the space.